promise I'll love you forever and ever. If you were my baby, if you were my baby, if you were my baby, if you were my baby.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to tonight's Lasalle Public Lecture Series, An Evening with Murray Lachlan Young. I would now like to invite our president, Professor Steve Dixon, to say a few words. Professor Dixon, please.
Thank you. A few years ago, when the poet laureate of the United Kingdom, Sir Andrew Motion, was about to retire, Murray Lachlan Young was nominated by the public as one of the main contenders to take over that position. He was considered the people's favourite, but his somewhat risque verses may have ultimately worked against him in securing the position of the Queen's official poet. As one journalist put it, his hilarious poem about the increasing popularity of dogging did not concern the Queen's cute corgi dogs. Now, I first met Murray in the early 1990s when he enrolled as a student at Salford University in Manchester, UK, to study media and performance. It was a delight to teach him and to see his development. He's written since that when he came to university, he arrived half broken but left ready for anything. Highly intelligent, immensely curious and rather intense, he emerged as a distinctive creative talent and a powerful actor, playing amongst other things the psychotic Exorcist priest Father Barry in John Whiting's play The Devils. He also wrote extensively and performed his own theatre shows, including memorable takes on fairy tales. He's continued that theme ever since with a series of brilliant poems under the collective title Modern Cautionary Tales for Children. These are humorous, vivid, and sometimes slightly nasty nursery verses that he's performed both live and also recorded as dramatic vignettes for television, playing all of the characters. His adult poems can, by contrast, be very adult, so do be prepared, and three of his most celebrated works explore quite literally the themes of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. The latter includes a poem recounting a true story about Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards falling out of a coconut tree. Reportedly, Mick Jagger presented Keith Richards with a CD of Murray's performance of the poem to celebrate the anniversary of that event. Now, over the past 6 years, we've had many renowned artists in the public lecture series, from theatre maker Robert Wilson and film producer David Putnam to artists Gilbert and George. But this is the first time we've had someone who is first and foremost a creative writer. The timing for this is opportune, since in January this year, Lasalle launched a taught master's programme in creative writing, the first in Southeast Asia, and it includes a module on poetic writing. Now, I'm delighted to share with you that one of the students from its inaugural cohort, Salim Hadi, has already been so inspired that he entered a short story that he wrote in his first semester here into a National Arts Council competition. And we just heard this week that this has won first prize for the English short story category in the 2017 NAC Golden Point Award, which comes with cash and an enrichment grant totaling $10,000. Not bad at all. Where is Salim? Where is Salim? You're here. Stand! There he is! Come on! Salim! Well done, Salim. Congratulations. But Salim, you should also heed Murray's cautionary tales tonight of how earning great accolades very early in your career can have unintended consequences. Soon after leaving university, Murray became a performance poet of considerable renown, And like very few others before him, he truly arrested young audiences and made poetry matter to them. He made poetry hip, he made it extravagant and in your face, he made it rock and roll. And he was as at home performing to huge rock concert and music festival crowds as he was at a literary festival. Indeed, he's been a regular performer at Glastonbury Festival for years and has been a support act for the likes of the Pet Shop Boys and Julian Cope. His barnstorming spoken word performances mesmerized huge music audiences and brought him meteoric success. In 1997, at the tender age of 26, it also brought him a £1 million deal with record label EMI. Now that's a couple of million Singapore dollars back in those pre-Brexit days. Not bad at all. Now tonight, Murray will talk of this and other things and will of course perform some poetry. His topics range from the news, fame and fashion to naked country ramblers and the space-time continuum. He writes continually and currently performs new pieces every week as the poet in residence on BBC's hippest indie music station, Radio 6. He's just published a wonderful book of poetry entitled How Freaking Zeitgeist Are You? It received rapturous reviews and shot to #1 on Amazon's bestseller list. Murray is a true original with an outsider's eye. With satirical joy, he exposes human foibles and explodes contemporary myths, while simultaneously conjuring magnificent metaphors and lasting images. With a wonderful gravel voice and an exquisite way with alliteration, rhythm and rhyme, his poems are by turns funny, febrile, volcanic and visionary. Ladies and gentlemen, will you please give a very warm welcome to Murray Lachlan Young.
Hi. Good evening. Good evening, everyone. How are you doing? Has it stopped raining yet? Oh, good, good, good. We were worried that it was going to rain so hard that people might not come, but I'm really pleased to see everybody here. I'm going to start off by giving you a few of my pieces of more performance-based poetry. And the first piece I'd like to do, it's very interesting being here in Singapore. It's my first time in this region as well. And I was told today something which I found quite mind-blowing as somebody from a very different part of the world, is that the temperature doesn't change much. And it doesn't get really dark in the winter. And at the moment, I think it's getting dark at about sort of 5 o'clock in the afternoon in the UK, and then so the whole thing is completely different, and the level of humidity and heat is something that I haven't really ever experienced before. And so I thought this would be a good thing to start the performance or the evening off with. Would be a piece which I wrote on the Isle of Ibiza, and of course which is the great sort of bohemian holiday island in Europe, just off the coast of Spain, where I saw in heat, not as hot as this, but something similar. The European males have started to develop this habit of wearing a thing called a thong. And these are the men. And so, of course, I know what I've been informed that thong here and also in Australia means the things that you wear on your feet. Whereas, of course, in Europe and America, the thong is something which is a very, very skinny piece of swimwear, which is worn. But when it's worn by men, one has to ask oneself, is it wrong to wear the thong? Is it wrong to wear the thong? Well, is it? Is it wrong to wear the thong with hair bouffant? Is it wrong? Is it wrong to wear the thong with hair bouffant and play ping pong? Is it wrong? Is it wrong to bang the gong for those who wish to wear the thong with hair bouffant and play ping pong? Or would it cause a contretemps with those who wear the silk sarong and sit upon the high chaise longue and drink lapsang souchong strong and judge the throng who wear the thong, proclaim it wrong? They simply do not wish to see the schlong, ding-dong, within the thong, and thus decide to tong the thong headlong upon the moral prong, and thus bring on the long swan song and the last denouement of the thong, which is wrong, which is very, very wrong. So come along and bang the gong for those who wish to wear the thong with hair bouffant and play ping pong. It is not wrong, 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 it is not wrong. Well, is it? That's the end. Okay. Thank you. Steve mentioned a piece which was given by Mick Jagger to Keith Richards, and I think in the South Pacific, I think it was maybe 10 years ago, so it's the 10th anniversary of Keith Richards falling out of a coconut tree. The greatest rock and roll rhythm guitar player in the world falls out of a coconut tree and ends up with what Mick Jagger described as an hole in his head, and appears outside a London hospital wearing what appears to be 3 leather berets stacked one on the top of the other, doing a Benny Hill salute. And it seemed very inappropriate to people who are lovers of rock and roll that Keith should be, could end up looking like this. So I thought what I would do is write this rebuke, and as we hear, it was then passed from Mick to Keith. And it's called, If You're Gonna Go, Keith, Don't Do It Like That. So what the hell did you think you were doing? So blind that you just couldn't see. Not a thought for your legion of worshipping fans when you shinned up the trunk of that coconut tree. Because if you're going to go, Keith, go. And if you're going to go, Keith, go. And if you're going to go, Keith, go. But don't do it like that, Keith. No, Keith, no. Go in the middle of a hard blues riff. Go at the end of a smacked up spliff, a speedball, death plunge, Learjet smash, a coked up gunfight, high-speed car crash, coal black eyes, cracked rock and roll skin with your hand on the fretboard, cigarette grin. Do it like a kingpin debauchee, but not falling out of a coconut tree. Come on, Keith. Man, what did it to you? Who goaded you on? Was it Ronnie Wood that said you should, or was it Elton John that you tried to prove wrong when he called you King Kong? Did you snag your sarong? Come on, Keith, baby, please tell us what the hell was going on, because if you're going to go, Keith, go. And if you're going to go, Keith, go. And if you're going to go, Keith, go. But don't do it like that, Keith. No, Keith, no. Thank you. Now, I wanted to share something with you, and I don't know whether people are aware of this. I didn't know whether this would be a fitting piece for performing in Singapore, but I thought probably it is, because in the UK at the moment, I don't know how many people understand or realise that the politics in the UK is just gone completely crazy. And there are all sorts of bizarre characters coming to the fore. And the British Foreign Secretary, the person who is supposed to be in charge of the image of the United Kingdom abroad, and everybody that we meet and the world's perception of the UK is channeled through the Foreign Office. We have this character called Boris Johnson. I don't know whether any of you may have heard of him. And he walks around with his foot in his mouth permanently, it seems. And everything he says, it's remarkable. And some of the things he said as a part of the UK moving away from the European Union have been exposed as the most unbelievable lies. And but there is something so charming about this man that he managed to win the Mayor of London 2 terms running by being funny. Okay, which is quite something to say about the UK politics. And his name is Boris Johnson. So with an eye for the thigh and an old-fashioned pie, with the battle for Brexit, his rallying cry, here comes Boris Johnson, so Europe beware. Yes, inbounds the bozza, the stray polar bear. Yes, he's guffing out gaffs for the core to force. Come on, say something, bozza. There's food, then the war. For it's not until bozza's been loose with his tongue you can say that the race has really begun, as the Blair was the Blair, as a Hoff was a Hoff, well, the Bozza's the Bozza, the comedy toff. Yes, and the wonderful thing about Bozza is Bozza's a wonderful thing. He's bouncy, 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 fun. And the wonderful thing about Bozza is Bozza's the only one. A blancmange on a bicycle, bluff and obtuse, like a golfing celebrity. What is his use? Yes, he's too good for politics. Let's make him king. And so let's kneel before Bozza and kiss Bozza's ring. Thank you. As you'll probably find out a little bit as we go into this this hour or so, I have a lot of my work is based on a fascination with celebrity, and celebrity is what I studied as my dissertation when I was a student with Steve all those years ago, and I have become more and more fascinated with celebrity. And one of the things that fascinates me is the delivery process of celebrity. And I don't know what it's like in Singapore. I would imagine it's probably the same, because I think in any developed country which has a high desire for materialism and consumer spending, celebrities seem to be of higher in number than anywhere else. And so I've written this piece, and it's called A Meditation on Celebrity, and it's how did they get there? How do they get there? How do they stay there? And what is the reason? And I've tried to use only 2 words to write this piece, and that is the known and the unknown. Or the known are all known by the unknown, and the unknown by the known, and the unknown by the unknown, but the known are all known by the known. And when an unknown is known by enough unknown, then the unknown is now newly known. And as newly known, he is known by the known, who will know what it is to be known. Yes, they know that the known must be known by the known, just to show the unknown they know known, lest the unknown now know that the known are no more than unknown, that unknown. Would you like me to repeat that? Thank you. Thank you very much. So I'll stick on the subject of celebrity for a second, because again, I'm hugely fascinated. This summer, when I was at the Glastonbury Festival, we had the international movie star Johnny Depp showed up. And he said something about assassinating President Trump. And the world's media spotlight suddenly turned on him and Glastonbury, and the level of media interest was quite amazing. And the story just grew and grew until the CIA said that they had heard what he said, and they were taking it very seriously. At which point Johnny Depp apologized for saying what he said, but the media story had already done. And if you were to try and monetize that spotlight and how much it was worth as a product, I mean, it would be very difficult to calculate. And that is what a movie star or somebody of that level of platform can achieve by just saying one carefully thought out thing. And I lived in West Cornwall in the UK for many years, and this was a very sort of far-flung corner of the UK, and it's got a Celtic population. It's the unknown Celtic country to many people. So you have Scotland, Wales, Ireland, then you have Breton over in France, and then you have this tiny little Cornwall. And nothing really much ever happens in Cornwall. Something happened a few years ago, in fact, when David Cameron, the last Prime Minister of the UK, went swimming in Cornwall and appeared out of the waves looking something like a pink seal pup. And then he drank a cappuccino, and everyone said, well, they've got cappuccinos in Cornwall, how interesting, maybe we'll go down there. And that was the big event in Cornwall, which had been a long time, but then something happened to eclipse all of this. And it was when Brad Pitt, another enormous star, was up in Scotland and in Glasgow, and he hired a whole train, just a whole big locomotive to take him and Angelina Jolie and his children to London. As only movie stars do that sort of things, and royalty, of course. And then we got to London, and I had the idea that maybe, you know, because you know all these things about this multicultural adopted family that him and Angelina Jolie have, and all the children have their own tiny ponies as well, which I don't know why I knew that, but I did. And I wondered if the ponies were on the train as well. And so I was suddenly imagining all these things. And then he turned right at London, and he went all the way down to Wild West Cornwall, and he did something there which a movie star has never done, and Cornwall has never been the same since. He ate the national dish of Cornwall, which is a Cornish pasty, in public. And we were having what was a curry puff earlier, Steve, yeah? So if you can imagine a big curry puff, which isn't as hot, made of potato and meat, and the Cornish are very, very proud of it. All the miners in Cornwall always used to eat the Cornish pasties, and the Cornish take them very, very seriously. But when a movie star eats a Cornish pasty, it's a whole different thing altogether. And the only thing missing from that occasion was the presence at the Cornish pasty eating of a satirical poet to take down the events of that day. And in the absence of that person, I decided to reimagine the events of that day. So this is what I think probably happened the day that Brad Pitt ate a Cornish pasty. Then out of the limo came the famous Pitt leg, followed by the famous Pitt head, which carried the distinctive Pitt jaw that drove the tightly packed crowd into an almost hysterical Brad Pitt roar. Brad Pitt pasty, Brad Pitt pasty, Brad Pitt pasty, eat, eat, eat. But first he opined on his life's great lessons. Quantitative easing, global recession. He talked of tantra and then of karma. He blessed the fishermen and farmers. He clenched his fists to the ex-miners and then sparred with one of his burly minders. And then danced a hornpipe, which is a fisherman's dance, in the street and declared, "I think it's time to eat." And the crowd hushed. And he stepped forward and threw back his mane of long hair, and then roared like an ancient Greek warrior is thought to have roared before sinking his perfect pearl-white teeth into the large golden brown pasty. And again he struck, and again until the battle with the pasty was complete, leaving the front of his black cashmere mohair physique-hugging jumper completely covered with the flakiest of Cornish pasty pastry. His thick beard full of diced swede and a liberal scattering of potato. And the telltale flecks of a brown, fatty pasty residue all over the front of his white Pierre Cardin travel trousers. But did Brad Pitt care a jot? Oh, no, not he. I am a movie star, he said. I could have everything. I have Angelina Jolie, the most desirable woman in the world. I have a horde of children, each owning their own Shetland pony. Plus, I have unbridled wealth. In fact, only the other day I hired a whole Virgin train to get from Glasgow to London. But even with all of that, I, Brad Pitt, star of Ocean's 11 and 12, have to freely admit that this hearty parcel of meaty nutrition, known and commonly protected under EU law as the Cornish pasty, was undoubtedly a meal in itself. Thank you. Thank you very much. You're tittering down there at that. Obviously, the Brad Pitt pasty poem tickled this corner of the audience. I'm very pleased to see. I'll try not to pay them special attention because they're laughing so much at my stuff, but it's always very difficult to avoid flattery. Anyway, so this next piece is written. This book is called How Freaking Zeitgeist Are You? And the idea is it follows the zeitgeist things that are going on, the zeitgeist being the spirit of the age, the thing that is we're all supposed to be talking about, the things that we know that if we don't get involved in them, we're going to be left behind and we're not going to be proper people because that's the way it goes with the zeitgeist. And a big zeitgeisty thing in the UK at the moment is beards. Suddenly or other, every single man in the UK has got to have a beard. There is an enormous rise in beards, and they think that it's possibly gone beyond the point of the 1970s, where there was the last most bearded decade in the UK. I'm looking around, thinking of doing a quick beard count in this room. That's a very beautiful beard you've got there, sir. How long have you had that beard? Don't look around. It can only be you. A long time? How long's a long time? Yeah, you see, he's just very laid back about the whole thing. He's very, very easygoing with the beard. There's a few other beards, but you see, there's that's what a beard can do for you, of course, make you that laid back. Somebody says, "Hey, how long you had your beard?" I don't know, a long time. But you see, that's what beards do for people, of course. But then you see, are there any men in this room contemplating growing a beard? You see how shy they are, you see, because men who are contemplating growing a beard, they're not quite sure what it's going to come out. They've never had a beard before. They don't know what it's going to come out looking like, of course. So they've got these ideas of what if it comes out and it's patchy, or what if they grow a beard and all the other men shave their beards off and they're left as the... they've got all of these psychological problems, and they're in need of support. So I've written this piece, and it's a piece to support all men who are thinking of growing beards, and it's called "Contemplating Growing a Beard." You want a beard. You need a beard. Oh, you've seen what beards can do. The confidence, the joie de vivre. Oh, but which beard is for you? French fork, chin puff, cheeky Latin wedge, soul patch, neck muff, thick bucolic hedge, intellectual goatee beard, cultivate the shrub, nautical or boaty beard, join the beardy club, surfy beard or folky beard, fluffy pubic fuzz, black blonde ginger beard, join the beardy buzz, meet up with your beardy friends in a beardy bar, talk about a beardy band, name a beardy star, yes, name a beardy star, then scratch a little stroke, a little more, and plump and preen and poke and prod, yes. That's what beards are for. Yes, that's what beards are for. Now look into the mirror and see what you can do. Or who's that bushy beardy bear? That beardy bear is you. Yes, that beardy bear is you. Wholesome, wise, believable, vulnerable, yet fun, sexual, and magical. Oh, see what you've become. Now customize, accessorize, and strike a beardy theme. A pipe, perhaps a Breton shirt. Go on, go on, go on, go on, go on, go on. Some skinny jeans. Yes, 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 yes. Some skinny jeans. Now, out, out, out into the world and execute your bearded plan. Fulfill your bearded destiny. Become a bearded man. Thank you. Now, just a quick vote of, which women in this room like a beard on a man? Well, actually, first we must qualify that, of course, because just trying to think. There's trying to think of an international bearded character who's Attila the Hun had quite a nice beard, and there's a yes. I usually say a name of a serial killer in the UK with a beard, just to sort of try and illustrate the fact that that it obviously has to be the right man. But which women, if it were the right man, like a beard, and which ones don't? I mean, if you see that gentleman, how little response there was to that. A few women, I don't know, which that sort of level of uptake in a survey in a room really kind of gets us to the place where men have been since the dawn of time, which is asking, what do women want? And I, of course, would, not usually have any idea at all, but in recent times, I now, through research, and I've crossed over to the other side, so I now not only know what women want, I know what they need, because I've been reading women's glossy magazines. And in there you can find out what they want and what they need, and there's so much of it. But the thing that you need, you women in this room, apparently, according to women's glossy magazines, is you need the technosexual in your life. A technosexual who's a bit geeky and he's a bit sort of fashiony, but the big kicker is he can take care of all of your IT needs. And of course, you sort of the ripple of feminine laughter washes from one side of the room to other, which can only mean that I am absolutely correct in what I say. And so this character, who is the technosexual, he replaces men of previous generations who were created by glossy magazines as well. And so you go from the 1970s, apparently, where there was the retrosexual, who was a caveman with enormous muscles, who wandered around in various parts of the world in cut-down denim shorts and a tool belt, doing various different acts of DIY and putting up bookshelves and things like that in the houses of the 1970s. And at cheese and wine parties, or things that they did in the 1970s, he was so masculine that he couldn't hold a wine glass. It would smash in his hand. So he would stand in the corner drinking from a stone bowl, whilst women pointed at him and said, "How did she tame him? How did she get him? He was the beast man of the 1970s." And so he was then replaced by the idea of the next character who came on before the technosexual, which is the metrosexual. Now, the metrosexual metro is in the clue. It's a guy who hangs around in urban environments, but the big thing about him is that he differs on a polar level from the retrosexual, is that he doesn't know how to handle power tools at all. But what he can do is go shopping for women's clothes with a woman and make astute sartorial choices for the lady in his life. And he can do this. Not only can he do that while there are major sporting events on television and somehow remain heterosexual. So so you have those two, and now you have the technosexual, which is headphone jack to mini jack, SCART to USB, Bluetooth truth, I do deduce that you recognize my USP, half geek, half fashionista. I'm half what you need and I'm half what you like, and I'm halfway there already, baby, with my rucksack, laptop, fixed wheeled bike, yeah. I'm the technosexual and the hottest guy in town. Number one name on your speed dial, baby, when your Wi-Fi crashes down. And you had that retrosexual with his caveman abs and his mono brow, and you had that metrosexual too, but he kind of lacked that boom boom pow, and you forgave him his cucumber face masks because he got you bootleg Celine Dion tracks, but you had to draw the line on his fake tanned ass when he stole your last Hollywood bikini wax. But with the technosexual, it's different because he's got your URL, and he can take you right back to factory settings. He can make your social network swell. He can reconfigure your pixel count. He can love you digitally, and he can give you everything you want in the world if you just let him put his dongle inside. USB port. Thank you. I don't know how long I've been going on for. I'm thinking about whether I do one more or I start telling you all about my life. I think maybe I'll do one more. Okay, so this is a piece which is based on a character who many people may know. He's an international rap superstar, stroke multi-million dollar businessman. He's a rapper, and his name is Mr. P Diddy. And he, also known as Puff Daddy, also known as Sean Puffy Combs, also known as Puff. And he is known for his extravagant lifestyle, his amazing grasp on the art of public relations and marketing, his incredible publicity stunts. And he appeared in London not so long ago at a club in central London called the Runway Club. And he had an entourage around him which was enormous. And in the entourage were two men who were tasked to spray Mr. P. Diddy's own brand perfume. Sean John. Sean John, every 5 minutes in the room to keep the air Diddified. And apparently he came in with his entourage. He did a little dance on the dance floor, went and sat in a booth and drank his own brand vodka around surrounded by his people, and then disappeared into the night, leaving everyone gasping for air. And the only thing missing from that night, of course, was a satirical poet to take down the events of what was going on. And so in the absence of that very important member of his entourage, I decided to reimagine the events of that night, and so this is the night that Mr. P Diddy arrived in London at the Runway Club. The vibe was contagious. His entrance outrageous. To breathe in the air became disadvantageous. With a tss of his special fragrance, sprayed by his very special fragrance sprayers. Into the room busted Sean Diddy Combs onto Raj, very large for a bling-bling player. A bling-bling player, yeah, yeah. A bling-bling player and all the ladies went a crazy. With a boom, boom, boom. A boom, boom with the boom, boom, boom. A boom, boom and the fellas, they put their hands up. With a zoom, zoom, zoom. A zoom, zoom with the zoom, zoom, zoom. A zoom, zoom and did he give a little love? Did he? And did he bust a little move? Did he? And did he give a little love? And did he bust a little move? And did he drink a little vodka? And did a little boom with the tss, 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 and the sub bass boom? Did the room smell the plume of the diddy comb? A diddy comb with a yeah, yeah. A diddy comb with a A diddy comb with a boomer like a boom, boom, boom. With a boomer like a boom, boom, boom. And somebody shouted out, no way, man, like this shit is obscene. And somebody else shouted out, chillax, blood. It's just like a middle-aged brother, man, like giving it the big one, living out the dream. And with the DJ gagging because the smell was so strong, somebody shouted out, hey, Diddy, you're the Diddy man. But the Diddy was gone to who knows where, but I guess it was a place containing crystal, champagne, hot booty, and bass. People in the living room getting it on, ain't going home till 6 in the morning, because that's what'll happen when you walk in the room. And that's what'll happen when you're busted by the plume. And that's what'll happen when you're drenched in the fume, when you're drenched in the fume of the diddy comb. A diddy comb with a yeah, yeah. A diddy comb with a A diddy comb with a boom like a boom, boom, boom. With a boom like a boom, boom, boom. With a tss, 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 boom, boom. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, I'm going to try and whistle through my life here. I've got this thing, and I really feel that I probably put down way, way, way too much stuff. But I'm going to see how it goes, and hopefully it doesn't take 2 hours, which is what I'm slightly worried about. But so my name is Boris Johnson, and my father is Scottish, and my mother is English, and I was born in Washington, D.C., and my father worked as a very junior member of the British embassy there, and came back to the UK and lived 30 miles south of London. My father worked in Whitehall in the government, and my mother was a teacher. And I was a born performer. And so my, my first part was, there we go, Cerberus, the three-headed dog, in which I played at the age of 6 years old in the school play, and that is the guardian to the Greek underworld in the story of Orpheus and the underworld. And so I was also, I think, introduced to a love of language and words by my mother at an early age, and she read me a lot of rhyming verse from the Oxford English Children's Book of Verse. And so I'd like to share with you one of the first things that I was read, and it's a cautionary tale, and I became fascinated as a child by these appalling things that would happen from these Victorian writers, constantly sending children to their death for no apparent reason, apart from that they did something very simple and very wrong. I mean, the crime that is committed here is so minor, I really don't feel that the punishment is in any way correct or legal, unless you lived in Saudi Arabia. Okay, so there was a boy whose name was Jim. His friends were very good to him. They gave him tea and cakes and ham and slices of delicious ham and chocolate and pink inside and little tricycles to ride. They read him stories through and through and even took him to the zoo. But there it was the awful fate befell him which I now relate. You know, at least you ought to know, For I have often told you so, that children never are allowed to leave their nurses in a crowd. But now this was Jim's especial foible. He ran away when he was able, and on this inauspicious day he slipped his hand and ran away. He hadn't gone a yard when bang, with open jaws, the lion sprang. Do you see what I mean? and hungrily began to eat, the boy beginning at his feet. Now just imagine how it feels. He's really going for it now. When first your toes and then your heels, and then by varying degrees your shins and ankles, calves and knees are slowly eaten bit by bit. No wonder Jim detested it. No wonder that he shouted, "Aye!" The honest keeper heard his cry, and though very fat, he almost ran to help the little gentleman. "Ponto!" he ordered came, for Ponto was the lion's name. "Ponto," he said with an angry frown. "Down, sir, let go, put it down." And the lion made a sudden stop. He let the dainty morsel drop and slunk reluctant to his cage, snarling with disappointed rage. And when he bent him over Jim, the honest keeper's eyes grew dim. The lion having reached his head, the miserable boy was dead. When nurse informed his parents, they were more concerned than I could say. His mother, as she dried her eyes, said, "Oh, it gives me no surprise. He wouldn't do as he was told." His father, who was self-controlled, bade all the children gather around attend to James's miserable end, and always keep a hold of nurse, for fearing what of finding something worse. Thank you. And that was, there's lots of them, and I've got them all at home still, and I just love reading about the deaths of children. And I've even written my own stories about the deaths of children, which I perform to children, and they love it as well. I have one called 9 Dead Williams, where they all come up on stage, and I line them up, and they all die one after another. It's quite bizarre, but enjoyable for everybody. So at school, school didn't really work out very well for me. I think I was an undiagnosed dyslexic. I couldn't hear what the teacher was saying. I couldn't read anything. I was a very late reader, and I was very badly behaved, but I was very, very good at showing off and sport. So that was where I was at, and my father was a rugby player, and my brother and I were both sort of being bred to be international sportsmen, as you can see by my physique, of course. My brother went on to play junior rugby for England, and I didn't. So so I failed all my exams, and sort of scraped into sixth form college, where I studied art sociology and theatre studies, and theatre studies was the thing for me, and we did a lot of writing in that as well. My parents, when I was 19, moved to Kuwait, when my father became the first secretary to the British Embassy out there. My mother became headmistress of an international school, and they were off, and I was out there at 19 years old, living on my own. Got a job in a, oh dear, I think I've forgotten all the slides. Hang on. There's Kuwait. There's Pizza Express. That's where I got a job. So I got a job in Pizza Express, where I managed to somehow or other transform the idea of pizza making into a performance art, where I was throwing the thing up in the air. I was obviously desperate for a stage, but I needed to earn money, and I wasn't going to get paid for performing at that age. So pizzas were good enough for me. I made enough money. I went to, hang on a sec, America. So I went to America, where I was born, and I traveled coast to coast, worked in a diner there, and ended up in Los Angeles. And I worked in this place called the Pink Cadillac Cafe, which had a pink Cadillac upside down on the roof, and all the movie stars used to arrive on their Harley Davidsons at this place, which was really exciting, whilst I served them ice cream from behind the thing, and I got to wear a bootlace tie, and it was all very glamorous. But I ended up being robbed at gunpoint by an obese woman which was quite a bizarre experience, I can say. Just walking down the street and this car door opened, a woman jumped out, this enormous woman, and the size that they do in America, jumped out of this car and said, "Give me your money!" And I was so shocked, I started laughing, and she threatened to shoot me if I laughed at her anymore. And then I gave her my wallet and said, "Yeah, take it all." And of course, after that, I'd run out of money. I had to go home. And I went, well, no, actually, my parents said, "Why don't you come to Kuwait?" So I was nearly 21 by this point, would have made it 1990. And so my parents invited me out to Kuwait, which was really quite an interesting. I had my 21st birthday there at the British Embassy, but was deadly keen to get back to London and make my mark on London. And I came in London, I became a waiter and failed terribly at it, and because I didn't really want to do it. And I couldn't bear serving people, really. I didn't mind doing it in America when I was pretending to be a movie star. That was fine. Doing it in London was no good. So I got a job as a cycle courier and then got knocked off my bike twice because it's so dangerous cycling in London, and decided that... And also the thing in London, I couldn't understand why nobody knew me. And I know it's a really odd thing, but I was wandering around, why doesn't anybody know me? What's going on? Surely people should know who I am. A very sort of small town view on things. So I went off to the country, and where I'd been, my mother's sister had married a farmer, and I used to go and visit this farm when I was a child, and they named two of the bullocks there, Hamish and Murray. My brother's name's Hamish and Murray. So with fond memories, we never found out what happened to Hamish and Murray. Hamburgers, I think. But we, so I went to the farm thinking I can relax at this farm. And the first thing that happened there is my uncle, who was an ex-soldier, obviously clearly didn't want me to be there. And in rain, not quite as heavy as we've seen today, the first task he gave me was to go into the calf pens the first thing he said is go onto they had an old tennis court which wasn't working anymore, grass court, and I had to dig this hole, I had to dig these huge, great big lumps of concrete out, which were the support posts for this tennis court, dragged them out with a tractor, smashed them up with a sledgehammer, and I went back in and I said, I've done it, I've pulled the concrete out of the ground, I've smashed it up with a sledgehammer, thinking he'd say, well done. And he said, there's a dead calf through there. Now go and throw that in the hole and throw the concrete on top of it. And so, looking like a murderer, I sort of went into this calf store and pulled this dead animal out, whilst all the calves, if they had fingers, they would have pointed at me. You killed him. It was you. And this animal was staring me in the eyes, so I ended up putting a sack over its head. And then had to put it in a wheelbarrow. And as I walked in the pouring rain with this sack over the head of this thing, I thought, I should have stayed in London. But I did it and I carried on. But the thing that happened to me on that farm, which was really important, was I learned to do a day's work. I learned to start a job and I learned to finish a job and see it all the way through. And that's something I'd never been able to do up to that point. And so I left feeling, I then applied for Salford University. And I went up there and did my audition and the interview and everything, and I was accepted, which was really, it's an amazing thing, because I didn't think I was actually going to do higher education. And at this time, so I got back from Salford and I was sort of celebrating, and I got a call from the Foreign Office in London, and it said, and the Kuwait war had just started, and they said, your parents have gone missing, and nobody knew where they were, and suddenly, life fell into a slightly different perspective. 2 days later, I woke up in my bed at the farm, and my father was sitting at the end of the bed telling me that my mother had left him as they were coming back from Kuwait. And I got caught up in the middle of this very, very nasty fight between my parents, thinking that I could do something about it and thinking that I could be of some sort of help, and all I did was hurt myself. And I arrived at in Salford in a really bad way. I was having panic attacks and all sorts of stuff, and it wasn't looking particularly good for me. But there was a great counsellor at the college, and the thing for me of having someone who had not really had a particularly good experience with education, suddenly there were people on the staff at this college who were actually interested in what I was saying and what I was thinking, and I was starting to get really, really positive feedback about my work, about my thoughts, about what I was trying to do. And I didn't realize that that was what I'd really been lacking all the way through my education, was people saying, I see you, and you're good, and you need to keep on doing that. You could do this better, but you need to do whatever it is. And things started to expand for me at that point. And also Manchester, Manchester sort of opened up, and this was this amazing time in Manchester where this real creativity was happening within the music industry. I was introduced to all sorts of incredibly interesting people. There was a great nightclub in Manchester at the time called the Hacienda nightclub, and I knew the people doing the lights there. Manchester turned into this absolutely magical experience of me. And now I'm just saying, what's this? Ah, yes. Hooray! Things started looking up, and then I remember there was a particular point where I was set some coursework for the course, and I responded to it in verse for the first time, and it was almost like turning a tap on, and this verse just spilled out, and it was like almost like I wasn't writing it, and so that was the point. So probably about the age of 22, I started seriously writing verse, and I didn't really tell many people about it. I just started doing it for myself, and then we got to the end of the course, and I did my dissertation. My dissertation was on stardom, and so I did a study of stardom, how it happens, how people get there, how it works, and there's a big academic area within stardom. It was incredibly interesting reading it, and what I gathered from the whole idea of stardom is it's an incredibly dangerous thing to get involved in, because it's being physically consumed by people. That's one of the great dangers. I mean, there's stuff you can do. You see it all the time with movie stars. You get one movie star who marries another movie star, and they double their fame by getting together. The first ever movie star's name was, the first ever star's name was in Western Star was Florence Lawrence, who was a vaudeville actress, a stage actress. And for some reason or other, the idea that she had been run down by a streetcar came about. And everyone was mourning the death of this brilliant actress. But because she was dead, suddenly she started becoming a greater actress than she had been, until she was this incredible actress. And it was absolutely terrible. Huge public mourning started up, and then she appeared alive. And she became a star. And that is obviously the idea of a generated story, of creating a story that can then create a platform for an individual to go forward and elevate their position up to that of a star. And of course, so many stars end up in a terrible position, because the idea of being consumed is a lot more serious than it seems. So I left the dissertation realizing and understanding that the only way that anybody should really and truly expose themselves to the media is by wearing a mask. And so I thought, well, that's obviously, it's the way forward. And so where are we? We're left. Yes, and then, as the last thing from Salford, we took a play to Edinburgh. And we took the play, Steve mentioned it earlier, which is the play of The Devils by John Whiting. And I played the Exorcist. Exorcise te immundissime spiritus omnis incursio adversarii, omnis legio, omni phantasma, in nomine Domine nostre, advocare et affugare ad hoc plasmati Dei. And that's the Latin prayer of exorcism. So if anybody was possessed by an evil spirit, then it should be okay now. So, and I arrived as this kind of crazy-looking exorcist in Manchester, and I made a huge golden cross out of stuff from the Hacienda nightclub. I put mirrors from the mirror ball of the Hacienda nightclub on this cross, so I could unload this cross off my back pull the sun out of the sky and then level the reflection on people. So people would be walking down the street and they'd be going, oh my God, what's that? And then they'd look up and they'd see this man holding a golden cross, which was all part of marketing the play that we were putting on, of course. And it was, we were taking a very Stanislavskian approach to the whole thing. And so we had all become our characters. And I lived as a priest with a huge golden cross on my back for nearly 3 weeks. And it became more and more bizarre as it went on. That every day I was doing these exorcisms and I was expelling all this negative energy on stage. And so I became this sort of empty vessel wandering around. And then people started coming up to me and asking me to bless their babies. And old tramps or, vagrants in the street coming up and asking me to bless them because they thought they might be dying soon. And people wanting all sorts of people asking me to just to listen to them. And I was saying, no, I'm not actually a priest. I'm just an actor doing this. And they just didn't want to listen. They just wanted me to be a priest. And so that was a very interesting time of realizing that if you say you are something and you act like it and other people agree, then you kind of are it, which is really weird. And so I took that back to Manchester with me and watched it all fade away. And I thought, okay, now this is the end of my course. I am ready for the big wide world. I'm ready to go back to London, and I'm going to go back to London, and I'm going to do something. And I didn't know what it was, but I'm going to do something. I went and forced my brother to let me stay with him, and he had a friend called Tom. And Tom knew everyone in London. You know these type of people you meet. They've got these fantastic contacts, and everybody knows them, and they get free drinks at all the bars. They have the keys to the city, but he had the keys to London, and I had the keys to stardom. And so we came up with this idea of creating, for the opening of this big magazine in London, a game show, a performance game show. And I created these masked characters because I was thinking, I'm going to work out, I'm going to take that dissertation and I'm going to see if it works. And I'm going to see if I can make something, anything famous. And so we made these suits which we hand painted, and we wore makeup like those of supervillains. And we used the game Twister. You know Twister? It's a game. Well, it's a game where everyone. Do you know it or not? Yeah, you do. Great. Okay. So well, it's good to check. And we had this Twister game with a sort of transvestite hostess and a rock band on stage. But the thing I did was, in remembering the lessons of the stardom dissertation and the idea of also the Exorcist, is I got 5 or 6 people to follow us around with flash photography wherever we went, all the way around in London. And people started to believe that we were famous, and then other members of the press started to believe that we were famous, until suddenly it started happening, and we suddenly started appearing in newspapers, people writing articles on us, big fashion photographers wanted to talk about what we were doing, and these characters, and we could take the masks off every night, and it was absolutely, it was wonderful. And then we found that we weren't getting paid enough, so we were inviting to go to all these nightclubs where all this stuff was going on, and we were like, why are we not getting paid? And we looked and saw the star of the night, and the star of the night, of course, is the DJ, standing there behind his decks, doing this, an absolute hero, everybody dancing in front of them, taking huge amounts of money away at the end of the night. We were like, that's what we've got to do. We've got to become one of those people. And we were doing our sort of performance art in this nightclub, and one day a DJ didn't show up, and we decided to keep a record handy for such occasion, and the record was the Bee Gees' Saturday Night Fever. And so we approached the deck where there wasn't a DJ and put the record on, and Staying Alive came on, and everyone started doing this, and everyone was dancing, the whole dance floor was full, and we took it off again. And they went, what? And then we put it back on again, and then they took it back, and the person running the nightclub came up and said, what are you doing? And we said, well, we're not going to put it back on again unless you pay us the same money that you pay the DJs. And he said, all right. And I said, and we can do it every week. And he said, okay. So we put it back on again, and we walked away with our pockets full of money. And then our DJing career started. All the time, I was still writing poetry all this time. But the DJing career started off. And suddenly we were on the slope going up because we were wearing these kind of crazy clown suits. We were the clown DJs. Nobody had ever seen it before. It was a very novel thing. But we got to this point, we realized that actually, DJing is actually a real proper serious thing, and you've got to know what you're doing otherwise. And if you can imagine this amount of people standing there like that, going like this, it's a pretty painful experience, and it happened to us one too many times, and we thought, well, it's all very well saying you're something, but you've actually got to be able to deliver as well. So that was the next lesson there. So we stopped that, and I was deprived of a platform for my fabulousness, and so I started. The poems I've been writing, I started performing them one-on-one to people, and just talking in people's ears, telling the poems. People were loving the stuff that I was writing. And then somebody said, well, why don't you do it on stage? Why don't you go and there's a thing happening. There's a very famous jazz club in London called Ronnie Scott's. There's a thing happening at Ronnie Scott's tonight, and it's a sort of talent night. Why don't you go and do it? So I went to Ronnie Scott's. I arrived and got on stage, and I did my poetry stuff. And it went off like a bomb. And I was just like, this is amazing. And I was doing it in the same style as the way the Exorcist spoke to people. So it was like, but the poems are funny. So it was kind of like, serious person doing funny poetry. It worked. And in the audience were two record executives from this company called Almo Sounds. They came and talked to me after and said, we'd really like to meet you. We think that this could work well as a potential record deal. And then I suddenly had a record deal, which was amazing. I think I've thrown a piece of paper away that I was supposed to be. I think I was warming to my theme a bit too much. And so and then MTV came up, and MTV was this huge company at the time. It's not so big now, but they came over from America, and they said, we'd like you to have your own series on MTV USA. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. Flew out to New York, and they said, and I'd written this piece called, so I'm just thinking, the piece that I did, at Ronnie Scott's was the supermodel had a super night at the super restaurant. It was such a super sight when she super danced at the super nightclub with the super people wearing super clothes to the super tunes of the super DJ. And then for the world's press, she superposed. And when they asked her how her life had been, she just smiled and said, it's been really great. That was huge back in the 90s. Anyway, so I went, and I also had another one called I'm Being Followed by the Rolling Stones. I'm being followed by the Rolling Stones. Can you imagine anything as scary as that? That's the sort of novel idea, because they're being followed by people usually, but imagine being followed by them. Very scary people. And so I went out to New York, and I was sitting there with all these high-ranking MTV executives, mainly women, which is interesting. Very, very powerful New Yorker women executives. And they were like, this piece about the Rolling Stones, we love that. We really love it. But we were wondering, because David Lee Roth, and David Lee Roth is a sort of rock star at the time, David Lee Roth's making a comeback, and do you think... And I was like, I'm not going to answer this. I'm not going to say what you want me to say. Do you think you could be followed by David instead of the Stones? And I was like, wow, this is it. This is the way it is. And I just sort of breezed through it, but there was a warning there of the way that ideas are manipulated once you start doing deals with people. I came back, and I was given, and somebody called up and said, we want you to perform at this massive rock concert called Tea in the Park in Glasgow, where I had to go on before all the major bands on stage in front of 30,000 people. And I was so pumped up and full of beans, I thought, hey, no problem at all. So I walked, so the first band I was going on in front of were called Black Grape. And Black Grape used to be called the Happy Mondays. And the Happy Mondays were known for the most excessive drug consumption since drugs were invented, I think. And I had to go on before them, okay? And so I walked out on stage in Glasgow, and I looked down into the audience, and I saw, has everyone here seen the Lord of the Rings? The fighting Uruk-hai orcs. Their audience was so appalling, and the years ravaged by drugs, so ravaged by drugs that they were all standing there like and I thought to myself, oh my God, and I stood there and I went, good afternoon, Glasgow, and I started. The supermodel had a super night at the super restaurant. It was such a super sight, and it's sort of like, I could see them, and I remember looking down, and I thought to myself, if I fell off this stage, they would actually kill me. They would. There's enough of them that they think they would form a mob and they would tear my body apart. And as I had that thought, they saw me have that thought, and they all went, ah, at the same time. And then I heard this sound very similar to other sound, sort of the orcs marching off to war in the Lord of the Rings. And I heard it, and I was thinking, well, what's going on? As the words were still coming out of my mouth, and I couldn't hear what I was saying, but I was on complete autopilot, floating somewhere like a spaceman with his oxygen pulled out, floating off into space. I heard the chanting turn into a word, and the word was wanker. Wanker, 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 wanker. And if you can, and I don't know if anybody here has ever had 10,000 people chanting wanker at them, but it's a very unpleasant experience. And I sort of held it as long as I could and sort of walked off stage. And I got backstage, and all of the people from the record company were there going, you're really talented, you're really talented, no, you're really talented. And all I wanted to do was speak to my mother. I just wanted to call, Mother, I've just had the most terrible experience, I don't know what to do. And I was just standing there going, my ego had been this balloon, was now just this raisin on the floor, which has been trampled on. And I was sitting there just thinking, and I'd written a contract, and the contract was I'd signed, you must go on before all the main line bands for the whole day. So I had to go on again in 45 minutes in front of those people who wanted to kill me. And I turned, and all the backstage bouncers, who were these huge, great Glaswegian guys in black shorts and black T-shirts, who were the guys who humped the gear around, and they were like, wanker, wanker. I said, well, what am I supposed to do? Help me, what am I supposed to do? And he said this, you've got to understand that Glasgow is a people's town, and you walked in there, and you did that. And you've got to go in like that, and they're like a pack of wolves. And I said, you're right there. They're like a pack of wolves. You've got to slit the throat of the lead one, and you've got to declare yourself to be the dominant person on that. I don't feel dominant at the moment. I don't feel at all dominant. I feel like I need to follow someone. And they said, come here, and they taught me how to speak in a Glaswegian accent. But one thing I remembered, though, is I remembered when I saw those fighting Uruk-hai orcs, they were all obviously desperately thirsty and desperately dehydrating, as a combination of drugs and alcohol took its. So I walked back out on stage, and I thought, okay, I had to walk back on stage, and they went, ah, so walked on. And I just stood there and went, and they looked at the water. Oh. And I just held these water. I had a big stack of them under my arm, and I want some, and I went, threw it over there, and then, oh, you want some, and then threw it over there, and I had this water, and I was just sort of slowly beginning to take, and then I spoke, and then I said something in Glasgow, yeah, pish to your heads, and they were like, wow, that's amazing, which means you're drunk. And they laughed at that. And then as I was carrying on distributing this water, I said to them, I said, you guys, you obviously like poetry. You obviously love poetry. So we're all going to do some poetry together. And this is the words of the poetry. And the poetry is, who's the wanker, who's the wanker, who's the wanker in the white? And then I got this crowd, and it's 30,000 people all chanting, who's the wanker, who's the wanker? I was standing there, yes, me. I am the wanker in the white. And then the Glasgow disco backstage crew, they all came on and they stood there and formed a choir behind me and they sang "Who Are the Wankers" in the crowd. And suddenly it was triumph, and I got off stage and the manager of the main headline band said, "Would you come tomorrow and introduce the band?" And I left that stadium thinking, I'm never going to go on one of those stages ever again in my entire life. But I got back to London and ran into a beautiful girl, and who was a pop star, strangely enough, and she'd had a sort of big hit. Her name was Zoe, and we started going out with each other. And suddenly I realised, whilst it was happening, that this strange thing, which I'd written about in my dissertation, was going on. You put your platform next to someone else, and if you suddenly it sort of doubles up in size. And I certainly hadn't thought about that. But at the same time, the head of this record company that I was signed to, they found out that he had a terrible drugs problem, and he was sacked. And as a result, they didn't want to know me anymore. His silly poetry idea. I mean, what on earth was all that about? So I wandered around a bit. I had a bit of money from my record deal. I went to see, and I started going out to a lot of parties in London, where I ran into this other guy, and his name was Raz Gold. And he was a record executive, and I said to him, look, I'm really good at this thing, and what do you think? And I was amazed. He just said, yeah, sure. And he worked for EMI Records. And almost without, in a heartbeat, I had this record deal with EMI Records. And things just started, my star started rising. I suddenly driving around in really nice cars, being picked up by a driver and they were building my profile, and I began to realize I was on this thing called a priority break deal, which means there's those people over there, and then there's these artists over here. These are the ones we're pushing. And I was part of this priority break deal. And it got better and better. I got to Glastonbury Festival, 1997, and they said, would you play the main stage? And obviously, after the Glasgow experience, I was a little bit concerned about it. And walked on stage, did my gig. It all went really, really well. There weren't those type of people there. There were nice people in front of the thing, and I came off stage, and no, that was me a little, yeah, so that's me 1996. Can you recognize me still? I used to be very beautiful. A little too beautiful, I think. But then I came off stage and, no, that was something completely different. Oh no, that was the movie. That was Plunkett and Maclean. It was a film that I did. But I think I'm probably going to leave that. Where I wrote my own part for that. So that was on the route to Glastonbury, and then I came off stage and that happened. Someone thrust the front page of the Daily Telegraph in my face, and it said, "Young poet signs £1 million record deal," and I was absolutely shocked. And I thought, this is really, really dangerous. There's something that's happened here. I don't understand what it is. But instead of going, yes, this is it, this is the thing, I just had this terrible foreboding feeling. And I didn't understand why I was having it. And then my life changed overnight. Suddenly, the record company sort of upgraded everything, being picked up by a limo. I was walking around with like a swarm of paparazzi behind me. This thing went to New York, it went to LA, it went round the world. It got picked up by Reuters and was circulated around the world, and it became a major international media story. And as a result, I was hot, but I was a story. I wasn't an artist anymore. I'd become this story, and then more money started appearing in the form of book deals, and then Virgin Atlantic Airlines said, yeah, we'd like you to do some commercials, we'll pay you, £200,000 to write this and just spend 2 days and whatever. I was getting money thrown at me, and I was this sensation overnight. But as quickly as the sensation had happened, there was a backlash, and it was the press had realized that what had actually happened was a literary figure, inverted commas, had been sold to the literary industry by the pop industry. So it was directly messing with the status quo of the way that these industries are supposed to work. And there was also a huge amount of jealousy from people in the press. Who is this guy? Look at him. Look at the way he's dressed. Look at that stupid expression on his face. And then it's like, he's not a real poet. He's not a real poet. So that was the thing that started up. He's just some idiot performer, etc., etc. And people started looking at my work and saying, oh, look, it doesn't work on the page, and he's like this and he's like that. And people started to jeer at me in the street. Someone came up and spat on me in the street. I suddenly had, I couldn't go out because people were being really hostile towards me. I started getting really strange stalkers following me around. I saw someone started lurking around outside my house. And the change from this feeling of just being like, wow, this is amazing, my life is going so well, through to this very sort of dark side and becoming a media story, but understanding critically from having studied media that the media is an engine, and that engine is owned by no one. People try and own parts of it, but really all that engine requires is fuel to be thrown into its engine so to keep it going. And I suddenly realized that that's all I was. I wasn't anything more than that. And this terrible sort of sense of shame started to descend on me. And almost at the same time as that was happening, all of the people who were involved in signing me were sacked from EMI. And the house of cards came tumbling down, and there was nothing left. I went to see the new guy at EMI, the new head of EMI, and he said, we don't want you wearing these stupid clothes anymore. We're going to do this and we're going to do that, and we'll give it a try, and if it doesn't work, then we're not interested in working with you anymore. And I said, well, I'm not going to do it then. I've got lots of money, and I don't want to do this. I don't want to do it, and I left. Have I think I'd proposed to my girlfriend, so we're engaged, and we just left. We went out to the country, and we got we bought a wood with a little house in the middle of it, and just went and hid in this place and I started to realize that it had the overexposure to the media. I'd done hundreds of interviews. I'd had so many attacks made on me that I didn't really, I felt like I was going mad. I couldn't talk to anybody about it because I was supposed to be this guy who'd been so successful, but it was like I was sort of caught in hell, and I started to act strangely. I built a pretend pub in a barn and just went to sit in this pub on my own at the bar, with nobody else in there. That was kind of where I was at. And I just started to crash, and I think you'd probably call it some sort of mental breakdown started to happen, and all I did was dig holes. I found this as an old spring system in the woods, and I started trying to renovate that, so I was just digging holes all the time. And I didn't know really where I was going, and then I got this call from the film director, Roland Joffe, who directed The Killing Fields and The Mission, and he said he was making this movie about Louis XIV, and he wanted me to be in it. So I went to see him, and he gave me the part, and it was Tom Stoppard had written the screenplay. Suddenly I was out in Paris, and I was hanging out with Uma Thurman and Gerard Depardieu and Tim Roth and all these movie stars. I was suddenly surrounded by movie stars wearing a wig and a moustache and dressed as the gay brother of the King of France, which was just a sudden sort of like a flip. And so there I was with all these people doing this stuff, feeling kind of terrible inside, but suddenly surrounded. There were so many actors in this thing, and they'd all been through the same thing. And so I started to talk to people in that thing, and talking to Gerard Depardieu and hearing about his stories of what had happened to him. And all of these people had been through the same thing in one form or other. They were all professional performers, and they'd all had to get this point where their ego had been absolutely destroyed, and they had to build themselves back up out of it. So that really started, it started to help me. And then I got back, I went out to Sicily and found out that my wife was pregnant. We were expecting our first son. And I got back, and the head of the artistic director of Shakespeare's Globe, hope that's Shakespeare's Globe coming up. No, that's me. That's me and Vattel. So there you are. Mostly my own hair, not my own moustache, and that's with Julian Sands, the English actor. So that was 1999. And one of the great stories of that was that it was on May Day, and we were in the Parc de Saint-Cloud in Paris, and they put 3 35mm crews on me for my first shot. This was the first shot I'd ever really had as a screen actor, and it was me and Gerard Depardieu there and there doing a scene where the director had decided I was supposed to cry, and I remember at one point after the 30th take, Roland Joffe walking away from me and saying, "Someone fucking sort him out." And that was the real immersion into being thrown into the deep end of movie acting, whilst I was having some sort of weird sort of breakdown at the same time. But on the same night, I introduced Gerard Depardieu who brought a case of his own wine from his vineyard. I introduced him to Irish traditional music, and my last memory of the evening was Gerard Depardieu with 2 bottles of his own wine in his hand, doing Irish dancing in his Winnebago, falling over and passing out. So that was kind of a lot of fun. And then I got back and got a call from Mark Rylance, who was the artistic director of Shakespeare's Globe, and he asked me to write the prologue for The Golden Ass, which is a famous Greek piece. I then was called up by Radio 4, who said, "We'd like you to come and become a resident poet on Radio 4, where you come into the studio and you respond live to whatever's going on, and you write verse with that." So if, for instance, they're talking, for 1 week they were talking about freegans, yeah? So if you, do you know what a freegan is? Freegans are people, I think it's probably UK, USA thing, people who try to live on the stuff that stores throw away. So there's a whole thing that once things hit their sell-by date in a store, then people will, that stores will throw them into a skip outside the store, and then they will be landfilled or recycled when they could be given to people who really need the food. And it's one of the sort of big crimes of food retail in the world. And so freegans are people who go, and they call them dumpster divers in the States. And there's those people. So we have on the show, you had a freegan, then you had a guy who was taking up the bongo drumming. There was a priest or vicar on there. And there was somebody talking about living in tents. And so from that, this is the piece that I created. And there was also a market breakdown as well in economics in the UK. So when markets go crashing and government slashing, there's nothing, no absolutely nothing. There's nothing that can beat little bongo drum. No, there's nothing that can beat little bongo drum. With a tippy-tappy-tip, tappy-tip, tap-tap. Tippy-tappy-tip, tappy-tip, tap-tap. Tippy-tappy-tip, tappy-tip, tap-tap. No, there's nothing that can beat little bongo drum. Down in the caravan, late one night, moon and stars, such a wonderful sight. Far from the din, the electric hum. The only thing is missing is a bongo drum. There's a fella in a yurt with a bongo drum. He's got a friend, and the friend's got a chum, and they all get together with a bongo drum. With a tippy-tappy-tip, tappy-tip, tap-tap. Tippy-tappy-tip, tappy-tip, tap-tap. Tippy-tappy-tip, tappy-tip, tap-tap. Yes, they all get together with a bongo drum. Look, there's a freegan sitting in the skip, getting all the goodies for it goes to the tip. Edamame beans and a pie, then a plum, and the next thing you know, it's a bongo drum. There's a freegan freaking out with a bongo drum. There's a freegan freaking out with a bongo drum with a tippy-tip, tappy-tip, tap-tap. Tippy-tappy-tip, tappy-tip, tap-tap. Tippy-tappy-tip, tappy-tip, tap-tap. There's a freegan freaking out with a bongo drum. Vicar in the pulpit, talking to the flock. Eyes on the vino, mind on the clock. Soon he's in the vicarage, having lots of fun. Well, he's banging with the bishop on a bongo drum. He's banging with the bishop on a bongo drum. Tippy-tappy-tip, tappy-tip, tap-tap. Tippy-tappy-tip, tappy-tip, tap-tap. Tippity-tippity-tip, tap. Tippity-tippity-tip, tap. Tippity-tippity-tip, tappy-tip, tappy-tip, tap. Everybody's beating on a bongo drum. Thank you. Well, I mean, so that was the sort of £1 million story, and what I had to do, I guess, before that moment had happened, when I realised I'd actually lost the ability to write, is I went and spoke to a friend of mine whose name was Michael Breen, and I said, I don't know how to write anymore. I haven't written for 2 years. And he said to me, let's have a look at how you create creativity. And I know there's people from a creative writing course here, and this might be of interest to them as well. And the idea is like novelty. What is novelty? Novelty is the thing that makes us interested in stuff, we worked out. Novelty is the thing that makes us interested in stuff, and novelty is usually built on the idea of two disparate factors colliding together to create something new and something interesting. So we took one word and added it to another word, and added it to another word and then we joined them up and created a system of writing, which I've used from that day to this as my go-to point in creative writing. And I now travel around and do workshops in that creative writing process. So I learnt to write again, having had a complete collapse, and moved to Cornwall. That's me at Radio 4. There's Cornwall. That's me as a surfer. So I decided I was going to become a surfer. And I was really, really terrible at it. I mean, just the worst surfer you can possibly have imagined. So I created the World Championships of Crap Surfing, it was known as. Because we worked out there was as much novelty in people being really bad at surfing as there is good. So watching people who are terrible at surfing is a really, really funny thing. And you can have hours of belly laughing at people who are so terrible at surfing. And there was one particular case when we were doing our competition where a guy who was so terrible at surfing, he was struggling. He hadn't been able to stand up all day. He got to the point where he stood up and he punched his hands in the air, and then he looked down and realized his board was actually on the beach. And so things like that were going on in the world of crap surfing. And so we had the World Championships, people coming from all over the world. It got lots of media. But the reason I've got that there is because we had our tagline was, without failure, how can we truly understand success? And so I lived in Cornwall for 10 years. I came back, my relationship had broken up. The thing that I got from Cornwall was actually all of these things, all of these failures had allowed me to become the person that I was. And I think I'm going to end it there. And now I've got, as a result of having been down that road, of having so many things happen to me. Oh, actually, one last thing I wanted to share with you, which was I got asked to. I've been adapted Dylan Thomas's Under Milk Wood recently, which was longlisted for an Oscar, which was really quite something. Using the same techniques which I worked on with this guy Michael Breen, but recently Radio 4. Were asking for new ideas, and I said I wanted to look into the idea of manifestation. And there's a book called The Secret. Does anyone know it here? So The Secret, the idea of The Secret is that you write down the things that you want. What do you want in your life? And you write them down, and then you imagine that you've already got them. And you do this process of imagining and imagining and imagining what it is that you want, and then they're just supposed to start appearing. And I thought I would do an investigation into this, and I'd look at the people who thought that it was a strange sort of occult sort of madness, some people whose lives had been transformed by it, and some people who felt that it had ruined their lives. And then at the bottom of the piece of paper, as I sent it off to Radio 4, was, and during this period, Murray will try and manifest a Ferrari. And so where have we got it? That's the Under Milk Wood poster, which was starring Risa fans, you can see there. And there's Freaking Zeitgeist to You, my book, which came out this year, which is all the compiled work from BBC Six Music, etc., etc. And there's a Ferrari. So I said to myself, I said I put on the end thing for Radio 4, and Murray will try and manifest a Ferrari whilst this is happening. So I went home and I sat down and I said, Ferrari, 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 Ferrari. And I was just imagining all these Ferraris. And I walked outside my house, a Ferrari drove past. I was like, well, maybe it's working, la, la, la. 2 weeks later, this is no word of a lie, 2 weeks later, Ferrari Motors called me up and said, we would like you to write the 70th anniversary poem for Ferrari Motors. And for that, we will pay you lots of money. And I thought, well, it's not quite a Ferrari, but but it'll do. Would you like to hear the Ferrari 70th birthday? Okay, here we go. And I said, so the brief was, I said, what's the brief? And they said, red. I was like, okay. Anything else? No, red. I said, okay, fine. So this is just with a one-word brief. Out of the blackness comes the red. Read the calling, read the soul, read the names upon the roll, Dino, Testarossa, Aperta, read the chamber, read the flame, read the mark and read the name, read the beating Latin drum, read the stamping pistons run, read the pounding of the hoof, read the unrelenting truth, rapture, euphoria, delight, read the apex of the bend, red makes red turn red again, read the line and read the style, read the heartbeat, read the smile, read the hands upon the wheel, read the fantasy made real. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Murray. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to begin the question and answer segment of the evening. So we invite anyone with a question for Murray to please raise your hands. Our ushers will bring a microphone over to you. Please state your name and where you're from before you ask your question. Thank you.
Hi there. We got someone down here? We got the microphone? Great. This guy.
Right, very good evening, Mr. Yang. My
Good
name is
evening.
Gerald. I'm a Singaporean.
Hi.
I hope your stay in Singapore will be memorable.
Thank you.
I'm a lifelong fan of the Bee Gees. I mentioned this only because Bee Gees was mentioned in passing by you.
I'm a huge fan of the
Right.
Bee Gees.
Thank you.
As songwriters, yes. Absolutely brilliant songwriters and brilliant performers, yes.
I totally concur with you. Now, my point is, you mentioned, of course, in detail, the vicissitudes of life that went through, how you first aspired to fame, wanted to go on stage to perform impromptu. That was exactly what the Bee Gees, the three brothers, actually sought in their early years. They just wanted to go on stage to perform, even for free at the beginning. Okay, their history and yours do not exactly parallel, but there are many, many similarities. They went through terrible periods of drugs, addiction, sex, and all that. I noticed that you either deliberately omitted that part, or in fact you led a relatively clean life in your, shall we say, more adventurous younger years. Were you involved in any part in this drug revolution back then? I hope not.
Was I taking drugs?
Yes, if we may know the truth.
Well, do you know what? I mean, as far as drugs go, I probably would have taken drugs if I was any good at taking them. But the fact is, if I did try any, I didn't get on with them, and I found that that they didn't do anything good for me. I quite like to drink some wine, but as far as taking chemicals, or I think that things like cocaine kills your heart, and makes most people incredibly boring as well, which is one of its which I don't know why people want to take it. But so on the whole, I would say drugs don't really interest me, and certainly never as a performer, because you've got to be with it, you know. So no to drugs.
Thank you for being such an inspiration, Mr. Yang. I'm totally drug-free too.
Thanks. think we've done drugs now. I mean, we've covered drugs. Anybody else like to? Yeah. Oh, hi.
Hi, I'm Vicky. I'm a student from the creative writing
Oh,
course.
hi. Good.
Hi.
Nice
Yeah.
to meet you.
You've written poems for men in tongs and men with beards. How about a poem for women? Thank you.
Yes. I can just go through my book actually and see if there's anything in here. But I do feel more qualified to. I have written poems for women in my life, but because this book is quite humorous, those poems have tended to be more sort of tender and from the heart, and but there aren't enough of them to make a book on their own, so they're sort of hanging around. But if you want to email me through my website, I'll send you a picture. I'll send you a poem about a woman, if you like. How about that? But a good point, yes. Men should write more about women, absolutely, rather than thongs. Which, incidentally, women look better in than men, of course. Okay, thanks. Anybody else? At the back there. All right, there's somebody here. So we'll get to you after this. Hi.
Yes, hello, I'm Olivier from the Creative Writing Program.
Hi.
You seem to mix a lot of French in your poems.
Some French?
Some French. You have lots of words in French.
Yes, I've actually got a whole poem on words in French here, which was there was the London riots, a poem about the London riots, which is written about because the English, obviously the English language has got a huge amount of words in it, and most of them are stolen, and huge amounts of them are stolen from the French, of course, and I think it enriches the English language because I think the English gave the French le weekend, and you gave us je ne sais quoi. You know, so it seems like a fairly unfair exchange because we get all your good words and you get our slightly boring ones. So, yeah. Someone else? Someone at the back there, yeah.
Hi, I'm a music teacher.
Hi.
And I do quite a lot of songwriting with children. And sometimes boys can be quite reluctant writers, and I'm wondering if you've got one piece of advice for me to pass on to those people to get them involved in writing and get more confident in getting pen to paper for the first time. That would be great.
Well, I've just come from KL where I've been working a school, two schools there teaching this creativity process to children. And I found that a lot of the boys, I mean, obviously it depends on which age they are, were interested in hip hop. So rapping, you know, that. So if it's put in a sort of like masculine kind of thing, they seem to respond to that. But all I did was say to them, okay, we're going to get 16 words. We're going to pick a subject, whatever the subject that might be. We're going to get 16 words, and we're going to take each of those words and mismatch them with the other words until they form 2 columns of 8 words, and then take those words and then pair them with other pairs until you have them in lines with 2 pairs on each line, and then you make them make sense. You force the words into making sense. And so what you're doing is, I think a lot of children and people who are writing, what they desire is to do the right thing. And everyone's got this opinion that there is a right thing. But in creativity at its core level, in as far as I'm concerned, the idea is purely to get out of the way of it. To allow a process to develop, and I think most successful artists have a process in the way that they work. And so what I try and do is introduce children and young adults into the idea that a process can deliver creativity. It's not about those kids who are really creative, and there's this. It's like having, you know, dark hair or blonde hair. It's about if you understand the basic ideas of how novelty and creativity comes around, and you're introduced to the idea of a process, and that process then delivers novelty and interesting things that make people go, wow, that's amazing. And purely by putting 2 words together that don't go together, And if you look at the known and the unknown, that poem, which is just 2 words, and what you can do by just using that idea of words which collide with each other to create novelty, and then adding things to that, I think then people realize that a process is something you follow, and so you become somebody who is a conduit for creativity, rather than trying to force your will onto words and make them do as you say, which then allows the ego into the creative process too early. So having fun, I think, is probably what that enormous amount of words boils down to. Having fun, discovering novelty, and understanding that words, if they're paired in a mismatched way, can produce crazy stuff. So I say, you know, I was walking down the street in London, it all seems to be about supercars, but I saw a Lamborghini parked at a bus stop, and so Lamborghini bus stop. And so the idea that you could actually just wait at a bus stop and be picked up by a Lamborghini, which would take you to the next bus stop. And of course, that's instant novelty, which is created by 2 words which don't seem to have anything to do with each other. And watching children use that and turning that into nonsense writing at a very young age, and then into themed writing at a later age, it's remarkable to see children empowered by understanding a simple process of where they actually realize something at the end of it, which they did, and they're not feeling like they've either done something right or terribly wrong, and there is some sort of matrix which they can plug into, which will mean that it's okay. And the rules of creativity should be at that age, definitely, and into later life, made up by the people who are doing it, rather than people pointing at them, I think. So that's my view on creativity in young people. Thanks. There's somebody here, I think, or there. There's somebody.
Thank you for a wonderful evening. I'm a radio broadcaster.
All right.
I loved your radio stories. I wonder if you have any tips on performance. You know, you talked about how the response of the audience shaped your content when you were on stage. Just public performance,
Right.
connecting with the crowd.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you wanted to start with radio, I did a lecture for the BBC a while ago, and just starting off with the radio as an idea. So people listen to the radio, and they listen to the radio differently than they watch a film, because the radio is more like an accompanying part of, people don't sit down and stare at the radio. So people are listening to podcasts, people are listening to the radio, and they're going about their business, but they're accompanied by the broadcaster or the broadcast that's going on in the radio. And so you've got these 2 different types of listening. And then there's passive listening, and then there's active listening. And as a radio broadcaster, I think the idea of trying to pull your audience through from passive listening into active listening seems to be the major job if you wish to get your point across. The question is, how do you do that? And I always think is asking questions, of trying to put as many questions into, and also, again, going with the idea that I was just speaking to the lady before about, is the idea of trying to keep novelty regular within a radio broadcast. And again, it's about those opposites colliding with each other. Performance on a wider level, there's all sorts of things. I mean, I think for people who find it very difficult to stand up, in my situation, I work with people occasionally on that. And that's the idea of who are you bringing on stage? Which is what I always say to people who have any difficulty with it. And what you often find with people who find it very difficult to stand up in front of an audience is that at a certain point in their life they've had a moment where they feel like they've done it wrong. And that little person, it's usually as a child, and the little person has packed up their little performer and said, right, that's never coming out of the box again. But then what happens, of course, and you see in relationships, if a long-term relationship ends, particularly with men, they say, is that the man goes from his actual age back to the age he was when he entered the relationship. So that's why so many men who leave relationships later in life end up behaving like children. the idea, so what happens then is that the person is forced into a position like this, be it at a wedding, be it at some sort of seminar or whatever, and they walk back on stage as the 7-year-old that had the terrible experience. And they offer that 7-year-old to the audience, and the audience say, we don't want the 7-year-old. And they go, I knew it was going to fail. And so all I say to people about doing this sort of thing is the person that you bring on stage is, which is the most powerful version of yourself? There is a part of you that goes to a wedding, there's a part of you that goes to a funeral. It's not the same person. You take a different energy into all sorts of different areas of life. And walking on stage, then obviously the person that you want to be presenting to an audience is the most powerful version of yourself. So I say, look at that, and then become like Superman. So you do some sort of change, some sort of way of changing. And I say to some people, even if you have a ring and you just turn it round backwards, and that means that you are the most powerful version of yourself, some sort of physical indicator that you've changed into being this, and you're not taking a baby on stage. You're taking your most powerful adult self on there, and you're taking your humor. And there was a great British performer whose name was Norman Wisdom, who came up with a very good idea on stage performance, is to walk onto stage, is to stand off stage and get really, really excited about the opportunity that you have to come on and share what it is with an audience. And what he did is he imagines that all of his dead relatives, all of his best friends from all around the world are all sitting there in the audience. He walks on stage and he's like, I just can't. And you see this looking, and the audience just start to melt, because this man is like, he's just so thrilled to see these people. Obviously, you can't do that at a business seminar. You can't walk out and go, I can't. But I always like the idea is that you like the look of these people. I understand, but I stand off stage and I think, and also the idea of honoring the audience as well, of looking at these people and just thinking these people could have been anywhere else in the world tonight, and they've chosen to come here. And for that, I have enormous gratitude. And every single one of these people has a life. Every single one of these people has a family. Every one of these people is getting through their life the best way they possibly can. And for that, I have an enormous amount of respect for these people. I really like them. I really like the look of them. And I really want to go out and share myself with these people and just do something great, because it's just so great that they're here. And so that combination of being powerful and being grown up, and then just going, wow, this is amazing. And that wow just comes across to an audience, and an audience feels it, and because it's a genuine thing. And that's the beauty of live communication versus movies. And that's why I think live performance and things like TED Talks, all sorts of stuff, is starting to come to the fore, because there is nothing like people physically in a room together, and it's been going since the dawn of time, and that's what we like, and the screen is great, but live is better in my opinion. So yeah, thank you. Yes, there's somebody, do you want to pass the microphone down?
Hi, Murray.
Hi.
My name is Fingal.
Nice to meet you.
I'm from Sweden, and I've lived here for most of my life in Singapore. I'm a working actor here in Singapore. And my question to you is, you've obviously been exposed to a lot of fame and everything. There's a lot of different things going on all around the world when it comes to acting and entertainment and everything like that. My question to you is, how would you prepare yourself mentally in the state of seeing yourself going into that kind of fame or going into this kind of deal that you're making without you getting so
burnt.
Messed up later on? I guess.
Yeah.
Like how would you prepare yourself? What advice would you give to future performers if they were to go into something like this? See a new world, a completely new world of entertainment and media and acting. Like yes.
Well, I think having a clear idea of, I mean, there's know thyself is one of the most important things, but to also to walk into the arena of something like this and to actually understand what it is, what is going on, And I've obviously been through the fire of the whole thing, and I wouldn't wish some of the experiences I've had on other people, but they're my experiences, and they're what made me who I am, so I can't really regret them. But I think it's very important for people to understand that there are different versions of themselves as performers. So there is the performer, who is the person that stands on the stage, and then there is the key thing, is to give one's expression to an audience and to go out and leave it on the stage and do something marvelous, but to understand that what we have here is a ritual that's going on. And to see, in the same way as a priest of any denomination will usually put on ceremonial garments to mark themselves as, this is the point I am opening the conduit to the divine, and this is the point where I will be inviting God into the room in whichever form. And then at the end of that worship, the priest will take off the garments of themselves as an active person involved in ritual, and then they will go back to their normal clothes. And then at that point, they're two different people. So there's the priest, and then there's a priest. There's a priest who's active, and then there's a priest who's passive. And I think the key point for people who are performers, and one of the most important things for them to understand, is that when you come off stage, there has to be a decompression. You see sports people, they finish their run, and then they warm down. Then they put their tracksuit on. They go for their shower. They come out, and then they go home, or whatever they do. And I think it's when performers, and this is one of the diseases of movie stardom, is because an audience thinks that they're actually consuming the real person, and so then the actor has to act the real person as well as acting the character as well. And the key for any performer is to understand the difference between themselves and the person that they share with the people that they love, the version of themselves that they share with their family and their friends and the people they love, and then the person who stands in front of the media, and then the person who stands in front of the camera or stands on the stage. And there has to be an active change in the person from when they are performing. And remember, performance isn't just on stage. There's a performance, and then there's a performance after as well, where you're having to meet press, media, fans, whoever it is. And that, you can't do that as your real self either. It can be very, very close to yourself, a very close impersonation of yourself. But you've got to hold on to the parts of you that you have for the people that love you. And you have to have those reserved for those people. Because if you start sharing your heart with thousands and thousands of people, then there are some people who are enlightened who can possibly do that. But for an actor to go around giving away the things of themselves that make them who they are, then there's nothing left. And when there's nothing left, then you are just a shell. And if you're a shell, then obviously life becomes incredibly tough, because
so you're acting as an actor, pretty much, kind of like.
Yeah, I mean, it's purely understanding the difference between there is you for your friends, because you know who the people they get famous. Oh my God, they've changed. Do you remember what they used to be like? They used to be such a nice guy, and now look at him. Now he's got this fame. He's this terrible person, and that's people allowing their ego to slip into their personal life, or their personal life to slip into the life where their ego should be protecting them. And it's just understanding those basic differences, I think, and Don't hang out with fans, really. It's dangerous.
Yeah.
And they turn into stalkers. But obviously, always respect your audience as well, of course.
Thank you so much.
Hi, thanks.
Hi, thank you. I've got two questions that are related to the previous questions. The first one is, who is your role model? Do you even need a role model if you're going to be a creative writer or poet? And second, do you write for a particular demographic?
Well, as far as role models go, I don't think in performance I can recognize great performers, and there's people whose work I admire, and it runs in various different areas and people I really like. And I have a role model who is somebody I talk to about, things that we've been talking about tonight, and have an ongoing conversation with a mentor who I look to for a lot of feedback and information. I think that's very important. I've realised in life that you know, it's very important to have someone who has a sort of greater grasp of things to feed back, and so I do that on a regular basis, which I think is good for mental health. And as far as writing for demographics go, I do write for BBC Six Music, which is mainly sort of middle-aged people who like pop music, but I also write for Radio 4, which is old people who don't like pop music. And then, you know, of course, it depends on the commission, but I try really hard to be able to have, if I can walk into any room, be able to put a set together which will work for any age group. And so that's the interesting thing from working through from children. I write children's poetry. I can just about handle teens. And then once I'm into the 20s, I can go right the way through to, you know, people who are of advanced years. So I try very hard to be able to reach a very broad demographic.
Hi, okay, I'm Nupur, and I noticed you sort of identify as a performance poet, which is something I identify as well.
Right.
With, and I also remember that part where you talked about people talking about, oh, well, you know, he's good on stage, but on paper he doesn't fit as well, and that is something I have personally dealt with.
Sorry, say that again, that last bit?
The conversion to the paper versus the stage. So what you put up on stage, converting this with same intensity on paper that you mentioned, people said that did not happen with your poetry.
Yes.
Yeah, that is something I have dealt with for about a year now, and now I see that you have a book, which means it worked out well for you in the end. I mean, you're good on stage and you have a book, so you're pretty much good on paper as well. So was there, like, do you remember?
Valid, yeah, I'm a valid human being now. I've got a book.
Yeah. Do you remember a point where you made that sort of transition from being a stage, or what I call it is a performance poet, to both?
Well, I didn't really think about it, to be honest, too much. I just thought, well, I'm writing this stuff down, and I think it works, and some people did, and some people didn't. And I would love, you know, I'd love to get my work in a book. But lots of people decided that it wasn't, you know, that they were going to tell me that it wasn't good enough to go in a book. And I just thought in the end, well, there's a great line from, and I think probably make this the last. We'll wrap up with this one because I think there's definitely. People starting to leave, which is always a sign that things should end, I think. There's a great line, and it's from the last of the Beats, who was Brautigan, and he said, "It's all a load of old junk, but maybe it's time people started reading my old junk instead of somebody else's old junk." I think that's probably where I'll leave it. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Murray. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for all your questions and your participation. I'm sure we've all really enjoyed ourselves this evening, and I'd like to invite our president, Professor Steve Dixon, to present a token of appreciation to Murray Lachlan Young. Professor Dixon, please. This is a painting by Philip Gudovic, who is a graduate of Lasalle. He obtained his BA in Fine Arts in 2012 and Masters in 2014.
Great, love it.
Thank you, Professor Dixon. And thank you once again, Murray. Please, everyone, join me in giving another round of applause to Murray Lachlan Young.
Thanks a lot.
So we've now come to the end of the evening's proceedings. Thank you so much for being here today at